tale of deception and horror gripped a community with its tragic twists. The night began with the promise of a seemingly ordinary evening, but quickly descended into unimaginable horror. Two people, once wrapped in the warmth of budding romance, were about to experience irreversible changes in their lives. A security camera captured them arriving together, smiling and chatting, seemingly unaware of the terrible tragedy about to unfold. When the police finally entered the apartment, they were greeted by a horrific, chilling scene. The smell of death lingered beneath the sterile cold of an overloaded air conditioner, and there, on the floor, lay her lifeless body, hidden by a sheet. Blood soaked the carpet, smeared across the walls and floor, telling a horrific story of a brutal, frenzied attack. Born Kimberly Karen Mota de Oliveira on February 26, 1998, in the picturesque Brazilian town of Manacapuru, she was the eldest child and only daughter of Nyla and Jose Ola. Kimberly's background was as diverse as it was beautiful, with Brazilian, Spanish, and indigenous ancestry blending together to give her striking features. One could say she had won the genetic lottery. Her flawless skin, thick flowing hair, radiant smile, and graceful feminine figure made her stand out in any crowd. From a young age, she was surrounded by admiration, and it seemed as though everyone, from her peers to adults, couldn't help but compare her to an angel. But Kimberly wasn't just beautiful. She was also an ambitious and talented young woman. She practiced dance, excelled in gymnastics, and loved swimming. Alongside these physical pursuits, she was a dedicated student, passionate about learning. Kimberly read widely, attended the theater regularly, and even pursued foreign languages, showing an early curiosity about the world beyond her small town. It became clear from a young age that Kimberly was destined for something more, and her early involvement in beauty contests only seemed to confirm this. She began winning local titles, modeling in clothing catalogs, and soon landed features in advertisements. Her striking looks and graceful poise in front of the camera made her a natural fit for the world of modeling. By high school, Kimberly had made a decision. She would pursue a career in modeling. This wasn't entirely surprising, given that her mother, Nyla, had also been a local beauty queen in her youth, winning the prestigious Miss Manacapuru title. However, Nyla eventually set aside her modeling ambitions to focus on raising her children. For Kimberly, this legacy was both an inspiration and a challenge. She had inherited not only her mother's beauty, but also her drive, and she was determined to take her ambitions even further. As Kimberly grew older, her star continued to rise. She participated in fashion shows, graced the covers of local magazines, and earned the title of the most beautiful girl in her hometown. By 2017, she reached the finals of the Miss Amazonas competition and was poised to try again, with her sights set firmly on the Miss Brazil title. It wasn't hard to imagine her representing Brazil on the global stage, competing in renowned pageants like Miss World or Miss Universe. However, Kimberly understood that beauty alone was not enough to achieve her lofty goals. She was acutely aware that high-level competitions evaluated not just physical appearance, but also intelligence, education, moral character, and community involvement. Beauty queens were expected to be role models, with spotless reputations and lives free from scandal. Kimberly worked hard to embody these ideals, striving to present herself as the perfect candidate in every way. The pressure to maintain perfection, the scrutiny of the public eye, and the hidden dangers of obsession all paint a grim picture of the realities faced by those in the spotlight. In Kimberly's case, the attention she received was not just adoration, but a dangerous obsession that ultimately contributed to a tragic outcome. Unfortunately, beauty can be both a blessing and a burden. Kimberly was highly active on social media, where she shared more than just her captivating looks. She used her platform to promote a healthy lifestyle, often posting about sports, fitness, and proper nutrition. Her online presence was not merely an exhibition of beauty, but a genuine attempt to inspire others, particularly young women, to take better care of themselves. Through motivational posts, she emphasized the importance of self-care, discipline, and perseverance, encouraging her growing base of followers to embrace a healthier and more confident version of themselves. By 2019, Kimberly had amassed tens of thousands of followers on her social media accounts, a testament to her influence. She didn't just want to be another model, she aspired to be a role model, a figure others could look up to. In addition to her health-focused posts, Kimberly allowed her followers a glimpse into her personal life, sharing behind-the-scenes moments from her photo shoots and candid interactions with friends and family. Her approachable and engaging personality made her more relatable to her fans. This authenticity, combined with her natural beauty, only boosted her popularity. Kimberly would regularly engage with her followers, answering questions, sharing advice, and keeping the tone of her page lighthearted yet informative. She was determined to use her platform responsibly, knowing that many young women looked up to her for guidance and inspiration. At just 19, Kimberly's ambitions stretched beyond modeling. She made the life-changing decision to pursue higher education, with dreams of becoming a dentist. Determined to balance her passions with academics, she enrolled in medical school and moved to Manaus, the bustling capital of Amazonas. The city, a vibrant contrast to her small, serene hometown, was not only the largest in the region, but also home to her maternal uncle, Henry, with whom she decided to live. Passing her entrance exams and securing her spot at the university, Kimberly seemed to have the world at her feet. The transition to Manaus, though drastic, didn't faze her. She quickly adapted to the fast pace of city life, made new friends, and continued to balance her studies with her love for fitness and modeling. With everything falling into place, her future seemed bright and full of potential. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, danger was slowly creeping in, an unexpected and menacing force that Kimberly could not have anticipated. In the fall of 2019, Kimberly went out for a night of fun with a close friend at a popular club in Manaus. Amid the pulsating music and lively crowd, a man approached her, introducing himself as Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez. He was handsome, well-dressed, and seemed harmless enough. Offering to buy Kimberly a drink, Rafael attempted to strike up a conversation. However, Kimberly, being well-versed in handling the attention her beauty often attracted, politely declined, explaining that she was with her friend and didn't need anything. Raphael, appearing unfazed, apologized and walked away. Yet what seemed like a chance encounter was anything but. It was a calculated move on Raphael's part. Unbeknownst to Kimberly, Raphael had been following her social media for nearly a year, silently observing her life from a distance. The 31-year-old corporate lawyer, recently divorced, had become obsessed with the idea of being with her. He meticulously studied her posts, learning about her interests, her routines, and her move to Manaus. Determined to pursue her, Raphael relocated to the city as well, securing a high-paying job and renting an upscale apartment in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. His brief encounter with Kimberly at the club wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of months of planning. After their failed interaction at the nightclub, Raphael escalated his efforts. He began bombarding Kimberly with messages on social media, complimenting her, inviting her out, and flooding her posts with likes and comments. However, Kimberly, accustomed to the attention of numerous admirers, dismissed him as just another overly eager fan. Raphael's messages went unanswered, but his determination only grew. Changing tactics, he began to infiltrate her social circle. He befriended her classmates, some of her friends, and even a few of her relatives by adding them on social media. Slowly, he ingratiated himself with the people closest to her, hoping this network of connections would bring him closer to his goal. Eventually, Raphael's persistence paid off when one of Kimberly's acquaintances, unknowingly, provided him with her phone number. Armed with this new level of access, Raphael intensified his obsession, messaging Kimberly directly and pushing for in-person meetings. He learned even more about her life, where she spent her free time, the kind of music she liked, and her daily routines. He even attended some of the outdoor fitness sessions Kimberly led, blending into the crowd and waiting for an opportunity to get closer. During one of these sessions, Raphael finally caught Kimberly's attention, though not in the way he had hoped. His presence felt unsettling, his persistence more disturbing than flattering. Raphael's obsession was growing darker and more calculated by the day. What started as admiration had now morphed into a perilous fixation, and Kimberly was at the center of it all, unaware of the storm brewing around her. After weeks of exchanging messages and calls, Kimberly and Raphael finally met in person, marking what appeared to be the beginning of a natural, blossoming romance. Raphael had been careful, strategic, and patient in his pursuit of her, using his charm and attentiveness to gradually win her over. Despite the nearly 10-year age gap between them, they developed a comfortable friendship. Raphael was thoughtful, always ensuring Kimberly knew he was thinking about her without overwhelming her with affection. His calculated approach worked like a charm. By March 2020, they publicly declared their relationship, and Kimberly felt optimistic about what seemed like a promising partnership. However, it didn't take long for Raphael's true colors to emerge. The charming man she had grown fond of began to reveal a darker, controlling side. What had initially seemed like genuine care and attention quickly morphed into something suffocating. Raphael's interest in Kimberly turned into an obsession, with him demanding to know every detail of her daily life. At first, Kimberly found his jealousy mildly amusing, thinking it was simply his way of showing how much he cared. She had never experienced this level of possessiveness before, and, being fiercely independent, she brushed it off as harmless at first. But Raphael's behavior escalated rapidly. His constant need to monitor her whereabouts became intrusive and oppressive. He wanted to control what she did, who she was with, and even how she interacted with people online. He scrutinized her social media activity, dictating what photos she could post, which comments she was allowed to reply to, and even when she could go live on her platforms. Kimberly's independence was being chipped away, and what once felt like a playful relationship began to suffocate her. As Raphael's obsession grew, so did his demands. Soon, Kimberly found herself in a toxic situation where she couldn't make even the smallest decision without his input or approval. Whenever she tried to assert her autonomy and set boundaries, Raphael would brush them aside, insisting that he only acted out of love. The situation worsened with each passing week. Arguments erupted frequently, and Kimberly, who had never been in such a controlling relationship, was overwhelmed. Yet after every fight, Raphael would apologize profusely, pulling out all the stops to win her back. He would take her to expensive restaurants, surprise her with extravagant gifts, and cover her with attention, convincing her that his overbearing actions came from a place of deep love. But behind the romantic gestures, his controlling behavior grew more sinister. Kimberly confided in her closest friends, admitting how suffocating the relationship had become. She shared how Raphael wouldn't allow her to talk to male classmates at university, how he'd take her phone without permission to inspect her calls and messages, and how every disagreement ended in an explosive argument. As these confrontations became more heated, Kimberly began to fear Raphael's unpredictability. She was starting to feel trapped. Kimberly's friends became concerned for her well-being. They encouraged her to confront Raphael, or better yet, leave him before the situation escalated into something even more dangerous. Kimberly, too, realized that her once bright and promising future was being clouded by the oppressive weight of this toxic relationship. She had dreams, big dreams, a thriving modeling career, international travel, photo shoots with world-renowned photographers, and the completion of her university studies. None of these ambitions fit into the narrow, controlled life Raphael wanted for her. She could see the stark contrast between her desires and the future Raphael envisioned, and she knew she couldn't sacrifice her ambitions for the sake of a relationship that had turned into a power struggle. By May 2020, after enduring 2 draining months of Raphael's increasingly controlling behavior, Kimberly made the difficult decision to end the relationship. But knowing Raphael's volatile nature, she hesitated. She feared that a breakup would provoke an extreme reaction. She bided her time, waiting for the right moment, but the situation had become unbearable, and she could no longer delay the inevitable. On May 10, which happened to be Mother's Day in Brazil, Kimberly found herself at an emotional crossroads. The COVID-19 pandemic had made it impossible for her to travel back to her hometown and spend the day with her mother, Neela, who was battling cancer and undergoing treatment in the hospital. Kimberly posted a touching photo of the two of them on social media, accompanied by a heartfelt caption expressing her love and gratitude for her mother. It was a bittersweet day for her. While she longed to be with her family, she was also mentally preparing herself to confront Raphael and end their relationship that very night. Later that day, Kimberly went for a run in a nearby park with a small group of friends, including Raphael. To the casual observer, everything appeared normal. She and Raphael seemed to be getting along well, and there was no outward sign of tension between them. But only her closest friend knew the truth. Kimberly had already made up her mind to break up with Raphael later that evening. She had finally reached the breaking point, realizing that her relationship with him was not only toxic but potentially dangerous. She could no longer ignore the warning signs or delay the inevitable conversation. She was ready to reclaim her independence and her future, even if it meant facing Raphael's wrath. That night would mark a tragic turning point in Kimberly's life, one that no one could have predicted. What should have been a moment of liberation became the catalyst for something far darker and more devastating than anyone could have imagined. At noon on May 10th, Kimberly called her uncle, Henry, to inform him that she would be spending the day with her best friend, Gabriella. She sounded upbeat, casually reassuring him that she would be home later that night to sleep. Kimberly mentioned that she had forgotten her keys and asked Henry to leave the front door unlocked. Trusting his niece, Henry agreed without a second thought. He left the door unlocked and went to bed, fully expecting Kimberly to return by midnight, as she had promised. Kimberly had always been reliable, and there was no reason to doubt that she would keep her word. Meanwhile, at Gabriella's house, Kimberly was rehearsing how she would break the news to Raphael that she wanted to end their relationship. She spent hours carefully considering her words, determined to handle the conversation delicately to avoid angering him. Raphael had become increasingly unpredictable, and Kimberly was well aware that this conversation would not be easy. Still, she felt it was time to free herself from the toxic relationship. By 9 p.m., Raphael arrived at Gabriella's house in his new white Audi, as sleek and pristine as the image he tried to project. Kimberly, ever polite, smiled as she said goodbye to her friend. She climbed into the passenger seat, waving as the car pulled away into the night. That wave was the last time anyone saw Kimberly alive. Her fate was sealed the moment she stepped into that car, although no one knew it yet. The next morning, on May 11th, Henry woke up with a strange sense of unease. The first thing he noticed was that Kimberly hadn't come home. She was always good about letting him know if her plans changed, and she would never stay out without informing him, especially not overnight. He checked his phone, hoping for a message from her, but there was nothing. His concern growing by the minute, Henry tried calling Kimberly's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He then reached out to Gabriella, who informed him that Kimberly had left with Raphael the night before and hadn't been heard from since. Panic began to set in. Something was wrong, and Henry knew it. Kimberly had never gone off the grid like this. In desperation, Henry tried to contact Raphael, but his calls went unanswered. More alarmingly, Kimberly missed her classes at the university that day, a serious cause for concern, since she had never missed a class without a valid excuse. By this point, Henry was certain that something terrible had happened. He rushed to the police to file a missing person report, fearing the worst. However, the authorities were frustratingly dismissive. They assured him that Kimberly and Raphael were both adults and probably just took off somewhere without telling anyone. They urged him not to worry, but Henry's gut told him otherwise. He knew his niece, and she would never simply vanish like this. Refusing to give up, Henry organized a small group of Kimberly's close friends and launched their own search. They started by heading to Raphael's apartment, but there was no response when they knocked on the door. His car was also absent from the parking lot. It seemed like the couple had disappeared without a trace. Kimberly wouldn't have left without informing someone. As the hours dragged on with no sign of her, Henry had no choice but to contact his sister, Neela, Kimberly's mother. He had tried to shield Nyla from the news, knowing how fragile her health was. Nyla was undergoing cancer treatment, and Henry didn't want to add to her stress. But now, with Kimberly missing for nearly 24 hours, it was unavoidable. Nyla had already sensed something was wrong, especially after her own attempts to contact Kimberly throughout the day had gone unanswered. Henry tried to comfort her, reminding her that Kimberly was responsible and stayed away from trouble, but neither of them could shake the growing fear that something horrible had happened. As the news of Kimberly's disappearance spread, her friends and followers on social media mobilized. They flooded their accounts with her photos, descriptions, and heartfelt pleas for information. Kimberly was a well-known figure, and her sudden disappearance quickly gained viral attention. Thousands of people across social media joined the search, sharing posts and hoping for any clue that might lead to her whereabouts. Despite the massive outpouring of support, no concrete leads emerged. Finally, on May 12th, 2 days after Kimberly and Raphael vanished, the police began to take the case seriously. The mounting pressure from both the family and the public forced them to act. With a search warrant in hand, officers arrived at Raphael's apartment, hoping to find some answers. What they discovered inside was beyond anything they had expected. Upon forcing their way into the apartment, the police were met with a grisly scene. In the bedroom, they found Kimberly's lifeless body. She was lying on the floor, partially covered by a sheet and surrounded by a pool of blood. The bed was stained with blood, and there were clear signs of a violent struggle. Blood was smeared across the carpets and floors, painting a horrific picture of what had occurred. It was evident that a brutal attack had taken place, and the perpetrator had panicked afterward. There were half-hearted attempts to clean up the blood, but it was clear that the person responsible had been in a rush. To buy themselves more time, the killer had cranked the air conditioning to its lowest setting, hoping to slow the decomposition of Kimberly's body before anyone discovered her. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Kimberly's friends, family, and countless social media followers were devastated by the tragic and senseless loss of her young life. The once vibrant, ambitious young woman was now gone, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. Questions swirled as everyone tried to piece together what had really happened that night. Raphael was nowhere to be found, his sudden disappearance only adding to the mystery. As the investigation unfolded, the media picked up the story, and Kimberly's tragic end became a national headline. Her death was a grim reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind even the most charming facades. The outpouring of grief and support from the public was immense, but it was little comfort to those who had known and loved Kimberly. They wondered why her life had been so cruelly cut short, and whether Raphael, the man she had once trusted, was responsible for this terrible crime. The forensic examination of the crime scene uncovered chilling and horrifying details. Kimberly had been stabbed 4 times, 2 savage thrusts to her chest and 2 to her neck. The murder weapon, a large kitchen knife, was found discarded carelessly in the adjacent room, still covered in blood and clearly bearing the fingerprints of her killer. There was no attempt to conceal or destroy the evidence, as if the perpetrator had acted in a blind panic, tossing the knife aside as soon as the brutal act was done. Even more frightening was that there were defensive wounds on Kimberly's body. Experts deduced that the initial assault had begun on the bed, but the fatal blow, one that severed her carotid artery, had been delivered while she was already on the floor. The room bore signs of a violent struggle, but it was the kind of sudden attack that left little chance for survival. The scene told a story of unimaginable terror, one that Kimberly never had a chance to escape. Raphael, her boyfriend, was nowhere to be found. His personal belongings, including important documents, bank cards, and his car keys, were missing, indicating that he had fled the scene almost immediately after the murder. What had initially been considered a case of a missing couple had now turned into a manhunt for a fugitive. All eyes were now on Raphael, who had become the prime suspect in what was clearly a premeditated and cold-blooded killing. The question that haunted everyone, from Kimberly's devastated family to the investigators, was where Raphael had gone. Was he still in the country? Or had he already managed to slip across a border, vanishing into thin air? The forensic evidence left no doubt that Raphael was responsible for Kimberly's murder. His fingerprints on the knife, the absence of any other suspects at the crime scene, and his sudden disappearance all pointed squarely at him. Law enforcement agencies across the country were put on high alert. Social media played a crucial role, with warnings and updates flooding platforms, urging citizens to report any sightings of Raphael or his distinctive white Audi. It was a race against time. Every second counted in the search for the man who had committed such a heinous crime. The investigators knew that Raphael was dangerous and likely desperate, and they treated every report and tip from the public with urgency. The break in the case came on May 13th, just 2 days after Kimberly's body had been discovered. A white Audi matching the description of Raphael's car was found wrecked in a ditch along a rural road in the neighboring state of Pará. Traffic camera footage later revealed that Raphael had been driving recklessly, fleeing the city at dangerous speeds before losing control of the vehicle. The car had flipped over and skidded off the road, landing in the ditch. However, when authorities arrived at the crash site, Raphael was nowhere to be found. There was blood in the car, indicating that he had been injured, but the fugitive had vanished into the surrounding countryside. It was unclear whether he was severely hurt or had managed to limp away, but one thing was certain. Raphael was still on the run. As more information trickled in, it became apparent that Raphael had not gotten far. After the crash, he had been picked up by a passing motorist who, unaware of the situation, had driven him to a nearby town. There, Raphael hired a taxi to take him to the nearest bank, where he withdrew almost all of the money from his account. He then used the same taxi to drive him to Boa Vista, a border town close to Venezuela. His plan was clear. He intended to cross the border on foot, evading capture and disappearing into another country. However, his escape attempt was thwarted by an unforeseen obstacle: the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to strict border controls in place because of the virus, Raphael was turned away when he tried to slip into Venezuela. His plan, which had seemed foolproof, had failed. Desperate and with limited options, Raphael didn't return to Boa Vista to blend into the bustling town, which had a population of nearly 300,000 people. Instead, he made a fateful decision to hide in the dense, forested areas surrounding the town. He found refuge in a small, camouflaged hut deep in the jungle, far from the eyes of the authorities. For several days, he remained there, hoping that the police would give up their search, allowing him time to plan his next move. But the law enforcement officers weren't about to give up. The authorities, working tirelessly, eventually tracked Raphael to his hideout. After days of combing through the dense forest, they stumbled upon the camouflaged hut where Raphael was taking shelter. But the arrest wasn't as straightforward as they had hoped. As the officers approached the hut, they were suddenly ambushed by a group of men wielding machetes. It turned out that Raphael had paid local residents to act as his bodyguards, using the money he had withdrawn from the bank. These men, unaware of the full extent of Raphael's crimes, had been swayed by his generosity and agreed to protect him. The situation could have turned deadly, but the police, experienced in dealing with tense confrontations, quickly diffused the situation. They calmly explained to the locals that they were harboring a wanted criminal and that the consequences for aiding him would be severe. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the men backed down, leaving Raphael to face the law on his own. In a dramatic final act, Raphael was taken into custody without further violence. The capture brought an end to a tense manhunt, but for Kimberly's family and friends, the nightmare was far from over. As Raphael was escorted away in handcuffs, the weight of what he had done hung heavy in the air. Raphael's version of the events when he was finally arrested painted a twisted and bizarre picture of the tragic night. The evidence stacked against him was overwhelming, leaving him with little to no room for denial. Surveillance footage captured Kimberly entering his car, arriving at his apartment, and showed Raphael leaving the building alone hours later. What puzzled investigators most was how calm both appeared on the footage, smiling, chatting, and showing no visible signs of tension. When Raphael left the building, he maintained the same eerie composure, giving no indication of remorse or distress, as if he had nothing to hide. With undeniable proof in front of him, Raphael eventually confessed, but the version of the story he offered was shocking and unsettling. According to Raphael's account, what was supposed to be a romantic evening took a dark and unexpected turn. He claimed that after they had spent intimate moments together, Kimberly had gone to take a shower. While she was in the bathroom, Raphael allegedly decided to check her phone out of suspicion and discovered conversations between Kimberly and several men on social media. Overcome with jealousy, instead of immediately arguing with her, he took out a large kitchen knife and hid it under his pillow. He told police that he had no intention of harming her, but only wanted to scare her if she lied to him about talking to other men. When Kimberly emerged from the shower and lay down on the bed, Raphael began questioning her about the men she had been chatting with. He said that Kimberly smiled and denied talking to anyone, which he took as confirmation of her deceit. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Raphael claimed he stabbed her twice in the chest. Kimberly, completely unprepared for the attack, fell from the bed to the floor, where Raphael delivered 2 more brutal blows to her neck, severing her carotid artery. According to him, as soon as the act was done, he was consumed with regret, but saw no way to undo the horror he had unleashed. He attempted to clean the scene, but realized it was hopeless. With no way of moving her body without drawing suspicion, he covered Kimberly with a sheet and turned the air conditioner on high to slow decomposition before fleeing the scene, hoping to buy himself some time. However, this version of events was challenged by multiple witness testimonies. Kimberly's best friend Gabriella painted a completely different picture of what had happened. She testified that Kimberly had spent weeks preparing to break up with Raphael, whose increasing volatility and emotional instability had become unbearable. According to Gabriella, Kimberly had rehearsed the conversation over and over again, carefully planning how to navigate Raphael's dangerous temper without provoking him. Gabriella insisted there was no chance Kimberly had been intimate with Raphael that night, as her decision to end their relationship was final. She further added that Kimberly would never have made light of any conversation with other men, knowing full well how unpredictable Raphael's anger could be. Adding to the weight of this testimony was Raphael's ex-wife, who recounted chilling details of her own experiences with him. She described him as a cruel and controlling man who had exhibited violent tendencies throughout their marriage. She said that his fits of rage were a constant presence in their home, which had led to the dissolution of their marriage. Her testimony painted Raphael as a man who had long been a danger to those around him, lending credibility to the belief that Kimberly's murder was not a result of sudden rage, but part of a pattern of violent behavior. The only person who continued to defend Raphael was his mother, Fatima. She refused to believe that her son could be responsible for such a heinous act, insisting that he was a good man who had been driven to violence by the women in his life. Fatima blamed Kimberly, Raphael's ex-wife, and anyone else who had ever crossed paths with her son, claiming they had all pushed him to sin. She clung to the belief that Raphael had simply been pushed too far and was incapable of such cruelty on his own. The trial, which should have brought justice to Kimberly's grieving family, instead dealt a devastating blow. The weight of their grief was compounded on the very day the sentence was handed down. Kimberly's mother, Nyla, who had been battling cancer, passed away just hours after hearing the verdict. Despite her illness, Nyla had attended every day of the trial through video call from her hospital bed. But the stress, grief, and anguish of losing her daughter, combined with the trial's unsatisfactory conclusion, proved too much for her already weakened body. Raphael's defense team employed a strategy of temporary insanity, drawing out the legal proceedings with requests for psychiatric evaluations. Despite their attempts, the court found Raphael mentally fit to stand trial. The trial, which began in October 2021, over a year after Kimberly's murder, had the promise of delivering justice. However, the outcome left Kimberly's family heartbroken. Despite overwhelming evidence that the crime was premeditated, Raphael was sentenced to just 14 years in prison, a sentence later reduced to 13. His defense of acting in a fit of rage spared him a life sentence, a legal maneuver that left many feeling that the justice system had failed. Meanwhile, Raphael's family was also shattered by the ordeal. His father, unable to cope with the shame and guilt of raising a son who had committed such an atrocity, took his own life just weeks before the trial began. He stepped in front of a moving train, and while Fatima insisted it had been an accident, surveillance footage showed that it had been a deliberate act. His death further deepened the tragedy of the Rodriguez family.